My name is Bill Buttner, and I oversee a research program here at NREL called the Hydrogen Safety Research and Development Program. We get DOE funding from the Hydrogen Fuel Cell and Technologies Office through their Safety Codes and Standards sub-program. And so I'm very, very happy to help support this Task 61 IEA wind project. I had been involved with the Task 43 IEA hydrogen safety, so it's nice to see that our work is expanding. I'm trying to change my slide. Okay. Okay, this is an image of me. You've seen me live. I've been at NREL since 2008, and I was hired for setting up the hydrogen sensor laboratory. It was under the Safety Codes and Standards group. It has evolved and grown to be a little more encompassing to the Hydrogen Safety Research and Development Program. My personal focus is still on hydrogen detection for safety and process monitoring, but we also have a very vibrant component and system reliability program and risk mitigation. Overall, we try to support hydrogen infrastructure rollout for new market development, and very much in favor of collaboration with stakeholders within NREL or external. We're also active in hydrogen codes and standards for safety in the hydrogen community. And I always like to give a plug that I did co-author a book several years ago with leaders of sensor laboratories in Europe, Thomas Hubert at the Bomb Institute in Germany, and Lois Brett at the Sensor Laboratory at the Joint Research Center in Petten, Netherlands. Those two laboratories have since closed down. Because this is actually kind of a small group, I'm more than happy to make this more of a discussion than a seminar. So please feel free to interact and interject comments or questions as I talk along. It tends to make things more focused, at least address specific questions. Most of our hydrogen program is being driven through a DOE program called H2S Scale. It has, of course, evolved over the years, but is still an active initiative with the goal to enhance the use of hydrogen for new markets and integrating hydrogen into other markets, such as production from renewables, whether it's wind, solar, wave. We're trying to enhance renewable production of hydrogen. And end-use markets can be transportation, such as light-duty cars, but also things as heavy-duty, such as trucks, trains, planes, and ships, and yes, even planes. We have regular discussions with the FAA. But also manufacturing, trying to decarbonize, even though we have to downplay that word, trying to make more efficient manufacturing processes such as ammonia and steel. So my program is now called the Hydrogen Safety Research and Development Program. I'm the AOP lead. That's a fancy word that I get funding from DOE to do research into three main categories. One is the NREL Sensor Laboratory, where we look at detection, both the development of sensors, and more importantly, increasingly important, because these are supposed to be practical devices, proper use of the sensors to actually get the measurements you need. We have a very vibrant component and system testing and reliability program, looking at failure rates, frequency, by applying HYCRED, the Hydrogen Component Reliability Database, and also trying to quantify what are the risks associated with these failure rates. And Genevieve Sauer has been working with me very closely on this program, and I see she's on this talk. To help facilitate this R&D activity, we have a subcontract with University of Maryland. Also, a third element of our program is we remain very active in the hydrogen codes and standards arena. Basically, active participants in numerous codes and standards under various umbrellas. The strategy to create a safe hydrogen environment is understand what the characteristics of hydrogens are, and then try to identify what are the potential hazards in your system, and then basically follow through by ensuring compliance with safety codes and standards and best practices. And we'll talk a little bit about how to achieve that today. And what are some of the properties of hydrogen that may make it troublesome? It has a wide flammability range, one of the largest of any known gas. I believe acetylenes is even broader, but we're talking about hydrogen. But when hydrogen burns, it's essentially an invisible flame. So you want to actually be able to detect hydrogen before it gets to that point. The next bullet, buoyant and asphyxiant, are kind of contradictory. While hydrogen is lighter than air and will have a strong tendency to diffuse upwards, that's not always going to happen, especially if it gets trapped. And it has a potential for it being asphyxiant. But seriously, the biggest danger is the flammability range. And what makes it challenging is that it's a colorless and odorless gas. And then the other two are just some properties. It's a small molecule, so it's going to leak where other molecules might not leak. Fittings that work for natural gas may not be appropriate for hydrogen. Plus, hydrogen can be has a different reactivity, especially on metals and some polymers that can accelerate their aging. But there are ways you can enhance safeguards, and one of which, basically all these are saying, pay attention to codes and standards. And what is a code? What is a standard? Well, a standard is basically a guideline that's developed usually by a committee of experts, oftentimes by consensus. A code is basically that standard that has been promulgated by a local authority having jurisdiction, for example, the state of California, and then it becomes legally enforceable. NREL takes standards and say, we're going to abide by them. Internally, we abide by NFPA 70 for electrical safety. We abide by NFPA 2 for hydrogen safety. Those then become basically codes at NRELs. What complicates the matter is that there are dozens of hydrogen codes and possibly hundreds of codes that are relevant for general safety applications. There, the organizations like NFPA, ASME, they develop standards through a committee of experts. And it is an interesting and fun process, sometimes not so fun, but it does produce a consensus standard, which, if promulgated by your jurisdiction, becomes legally binding. There are safety standards and product standards. There are sensor standards that are very specific in performance requirements. Electrical instruments have to have usually an NFC or UL certification for use. So a takeaway from this is that if you're going to begin developing a hydrogen system, you should start with a comprehensive review of relevant codes and standards in the early stage. And it can be rather daunting, but it is absolutely essential. For hydrogen, the most important standard is NFPA 2. It's titled the Hydrogen Technology Codes. It's, I believe, in third edition right now, 2023. Gets revised every 3 to 5 years. They're already looking at things to incorporate in the next revision. And we're active on the technical committee for NFPA 2. But it covers a variety of hydrogen systems, as listed here. It is not comprehensive. There's still gaps, but it is essentially the starting point. At this point, I will reiterate, you should do a deep dive if you're going to begin moving into using hydrogen into reviewing relevant standards. And on this page, I list about 14 standards that are specifically referenced in Chapter 10 for gaseous fueling stations, referencing NFPA 2 in Chapter 10. So you can see that understanding codes and standards is trying to understand an interconnected web of multiple documents. And I will add that we are blessed that we have someone who actually likes reading and understanding and integrating these codes and standards to develop basically a code and standard template for several different applications. The FAA for hydrogen infrastructure at aerospace he's worked on, and also green manufacturing for steel. Our specific role is in participation in numerous committees. I listed a few that I've been personally involved with. Also the GTR, Global Technical Regulation for fuel cell vehicles. We also do pre-normative research to guide science-based requirements that go into the standards. Things like guidelines for sensor placement, which is active area research, dispersion properties to look at flammable hazards to establish setback distances, etc. Already indicated that we did code analysis for emerging H2S scale markets. My colleague here who works with me has done it for steel and the FAA. Also, since new markets are emerging, this helps identify where are the gaps in this current standards, either in quantity of hydrogen or the integration of other energy sources to different manufacturing processes. And so this will help guide where we need other standards. And more importantly, our work is actually strongly communicated to stakeholders in the hydrogen field, especially the standard development organizations. And this is through conferences, workshops, and safety panels. So I'd like to move into my detection research. And first of all, I'll define what is a sensor. Basically, a sensor has different meanings depending who you talk to. Universities and research institutes develop what we would call a sensing element, which takes a stimulus, in this case hydrogen, and transduce it into an electrical signal. We call that a sensing element as per the definition in the ISO standard 26142, hydrogen detection apparatus for stationary applications. Once you instrument that with circuitry and you begin getting analytically useful information, that would be a sensor. And it basically, the analytically useful information would be electrical signal that can be correlated to hydrogen in the, quantitatively or qualitatively, but it doesn't really have a calibration. You have to manually do that. And also you have to, once you begin incorporating that sensor's design into a more sophisticated instrument, which the ISO defines as an analyzer, you get control functions such as a display, relays to activate warning and shutdowns, tracking of concentration over time, other functions. And then there's instruments, which it was not addressed in the ISO standard, but these are basically laboratory instruments for, like a gas chromatograph, mass spectrometer, or even a Raman instrument that requires a high power laser. These are very sophisticated instruments that can do very, very powerful analytical measurements, but often require trained personnel to operate. Whereas the sensing element whereas the analyzer is basically designed to be installed at a facility and just let run. Not to go over what type of sensors for hydrogen, what type of hydrogen sensors are available. There are numerous commercial packages. They're based upon different transduction mechanism of the stimulus that is the hydrogen at the receptor, and different transduction processes to produce an electrical signal. It's based upon the electrochemical activity of hydrogen, its flammability, its other physical properties such as thermal conductivity. And if there's a property, people have developed a sensor on it. But there are basically a few main platforms that are commonly commercially available. Each one is good. None will work for every application, but depending on your selection of the platform, it will control and limit the ultimate application that you need, and that you need for your application, and what are the requirements. And this actually brings to the point is when you do select a sensor or want to begin deploying it, what do you need to consider? First of all, you need to know what type of metrological considerations, requirements you meet. That's basically what analytic function do you want your sensor to perform? How accurate does it have to be? What is the measurement range? Do you have to look at interferences from surrounding chemicals? And, is there going to be cross-sensitivity due to chemicals? I already mentioned that. And what are the impacts of the working environment? Are you going to have variable temperature, pressure, humidity, et cetera? You could probably buy a $50,000 instrument to monitor for a CO in your home, but that's not going to happen because of deployment consideration costs. Deployment basically are the facility-defined requirements, and cost is going to be a critical factor. If you're doing something monitoring for hydrogen and natural gas at the home, you're not going to buy a complicated instrument. People are not going to, nor are you going to buy an instrument that's going to require a lot of maintenance. So for deployment considerations, you have to consider what is the application and such things as capital cost, electrical safety requirements, electrical power requirements. Is it going to require special wiring? What's the physical size? You can't have something the size of a small refrigerator if you only have room for a wall-mounted instrument. And also, is it commercially mature? There's new technology that's being developed continuously, but you really don't want to base your design on something that's actually going to not be available when you need it. And then there's operational considerations. Does this require calibration and maintenance? Do you have to hire special workers to support your activity? Calibration is something that's required at industrial facilities. These are periodically, could be as frequently as a quarter or at least once a year for sensors. Does it require consumables? A gas chromatograph will need carrier gas. Do you have that available? And then how long will the device live? Do you have to replace it every 6 months, or will it have a 5 to 10 year time? So these are some considerations for sensors. So why do you want a detection? What role can detection play? This is a safety committee, so obviously we want to focus on safety. So having a detector, hydrogen sensor, will provide assurances of safety. It'll detect hydrogen releases before they can accumulate, and which, if they can accumulate, there is the possibility for delayed ignition, which could be significantly impactful, if not disastrous. So you have to avoid accumulation. And a properly designed sensor will activate warning alarms and system shutdown. Also very important that understanding that you have considered all elements of safety will help assure buy-in from community stakeholders. Another consideration for sensors is to detect emissions. This is related to product loss. Hydrogen is still an expensive fuel, so if you're losing 10% of your product, the cost can be significant. There's also some there have been studies that indicate released hydrogen can have a secondary greenhouse effect. That is, it can have an environmental impact. So here the monitoring range of interest is actually not in volume percent. I did not mention that hydrogen has a lower flammable limit. Actually, I did mention earlier, you try to make sure you avoid the flammable range of hydrogen for safety applications. And so typically, till now, most sensors have been activating at below the lower flammable limit of hydrogen, which is normally given to 4 volume percent. So for safety monitoring, you tend to activate at 10% of the LFL, although people are now talking about designs that should activate at lower concentrations. But to begin quantifying product loss for either minimizing economic losses or minimizing potential environmental impacts, we have to begin going to sub-ppm level of detection. Another important thing is if we're producing a fuel, you want to be able to monitor its purity, or making sure that if it's a mixture, its composition. And so here, fuel monitoring could require up to 100% hydrogen. One market that's being developed is actually adding up to 20% hydrogen in natural gas. So monitoring can also serve the role of fuel quality verification, and actually even metrology. What is the number of BTUs that are being delivered to the end customer? We also do monitoring to develop hydrogen behavior models. How does hydrogen behave when it's released? And we do those models then to help inform sensor deployment strategies, where to place sensors to most effectively detect unattended hydrogen releases. And an area that we're becoming interested in, but we're not actually addressing yet, is developing sensing technologies to support prognosis and health management strategies, so that we can schedule maintenance on systems rather than have it imposed upon us with unattended failures. Getting into more specifics, hydrogen releases can come from a variety of transduction processes. There's operational releases. Whenever you transfer hydrogen, such as a fueling vent, or transferring from one storage vessel to another, such as mobile delivery of liquid or gaseous hydrogen, there's going to be a venting process that will release hydrogen. Hydrogen releases can also occur through design features, such as permeation through seals or even walls of certain tanks. But for safety, the primary one, not the sole issue of concern, would be unattended releases, basically leaks or out of normal events. A PRV that's activated improperly, breaches in a component, even a loose fitting. And so you have to consider, are these significant leaks, or are they more major releases? And the takeaway is hydrogen releases are not necessarily unintentional. They could be operational, but safety is critical for all release processes. And emissions, even the permeation, may have adverse effects, safety, cost, and environmental considerations. What we do at the NREL Sensor Laboratory is that we basically have a holistic view to deploying detection technology. We do laboratory analyses using specialized fixtures to quantify the metrologic performance metrics of hydrogen sensors. How well do they measure hydrogen? And how reliable are they? And we're actually focused originally for safety application, but we recently upgraded our basic test apparatus to go to PBB levels of hydrogens for emission testing, to basically provide tools to quantify releases. We also have test apparatus that can go up to 100%. The SSTA, the safety sensor test apparatus, is only designed to test sensors at or below the LFL. It's only allowed to go up to 4 volume% in air. But we have a system that can test process sensors for fuel quality verification and other applications. And the sensors themselves do not necessarily have to be compliant to National Electric Code for working in a combustible environment, because our chamber takes care of that. More importantly, where our focus area is now is on deployment and proper deployment. And there we're making extensive use of the NREL's resources at ARES, the Advanced Research on Integrated Systems, which has the capability of producing today, through electrolysis, 22 kilograms of hydrogen per hour, which could be used for release studies to model hydrogen dispersions and also to validate and demonstrate detection technologies. Another element of our program is extensive outreach through organizations such as this working group, as well as directly working with stakeholders. This just shows some of the metrologic laboratory assessment. Basically, you expose your sensor to a controlled gas, which of a variable concentration, and here's plotting a response from 0 to 2.5 volume% hydrogen. The black line, the red line, shows what the sensor thought the concentration was. Basically, it verifies the measurement range of the sensor, this test. It also verifies the accuracy of the sensor. Is it within 10% or whatever the tolerance is? But it provides us other information such as detection limit. We have ability to control humidity, temperature, pressure, basically looking at environmental stressors, as well as chemical stressors, meaning potential poisons and interferences. Such laboratory testing is a basic strategy for certification to performance-based standards. The NREL sensor laboratory does not do certification. We do validation for customers, though, and it's a core capability of the lab for laboratory testing of sensors. But we're more important to move more into actual deployment studies. Let's see, our test protocol, we have standard test protocols for critical parameters. They're standard, but they're adaptable and they're evolving. We're now beginning to do measurement range tests down to ppm levels. Already indicate we validate but don't certify sensors. And our testing actually supports both the developer of technologies as well as end users. What type of sensor technology will you need when you're producing hydrogen from wind and transporting it to an end use site? Critical thing about sensors is we're not testing them for fun. Ultimately, we can validate the performance, but this does not give the end users any guidance on their use. And so some considerations that we've observed, that I observed, NFPA mandates that sensors get used in certain environments, but they don't tell how to use them. And this actually has led to poor judgment on where the sensors should be placed. And also I have to say that the prescribed level for warning and alarms at 10% or 25% of the LFL may be non-optimal for leak detection and assuring safety. So ultimately, guidance will be needed for sensor use and placement, which is a prime research focus area for our work right now. And here's an example of what I saw, an interesting example that I observed of a compressor at a fueling station, a public fueling station. And the compressor itself was actually leaking hydrogen, but the sensor to detect the hydrogen was mounted on the backside of a wall. Properly speaking, this met the code requirements because there was a detection system at the station, but it would never see the hydrogen. So the code only provides a minimal assurance of safety, and it may actually be, if improperly implemented, could actually have negative effects. Another example that we recently observed, we were asked to provide guidance on replacing sensors in a working hydrogen facility. And we investigated the ventilation system, and it turned out the air inlets, the air exhaust was at the upper corner of the facility, which is good, but the air inlets was at mid height. And so when the ventilation system was running, you basically had two circular loops of air current, one basically circulating in the upper half of the lab, and the other circulating in the lower half of the lab, such that when hydrogen would be released from a system, it would actually occur to a leak in the lower half and basically be trapped in the lower half to the lower half circulating patterns. And the upper half would just be venting the upper half of the lab. And so this had two ramifications. One, the leaking hydrogen wasn't getting to the sensors, which were mounted towards the ceiling, so it wouldn't be detected. And worse, that once the hydrogen was released, it wasn't being properly vented, even though the lab was undergoing 6 air exchanges, more than 6 per hour as per code. Basically, they said the ventilation design is a critical parameter controlling enclosed hydrogen releases. And it's actually a topic of a white paper by the Hydrogen Safety Panel, in which we're trying to coordinate our research activity. The takeaway is that poor ventilation design can lead to increased hazards. So what we're doing is trying to support this organization in updating the ventilation system, and the outcome, and through this we're doing CFD modeling, looking at how the hydrogen disperses within the lab facility. That's why we know it gets trapped. Our outcomes are expected to give recommendation we already have on sensor type. We're developing placement guidance as well as develop calibration protocols. We're also going to be providing recommendation on the ventilation design and upgrades. And also, more importantly for the community in general, this is going to be published in at workshops, presented at code development organizations, specifically NFPA2, and also presented at the Center for Hydrogen Safety. This is showing how ventilation affects dispersion in an indoor facility. We're also looking at outdoor facility. But to show you what's actually happening at an indoor facility, in the absence of ventilation, we begin to build up an accumulation of hydrogen controlled by buoyancy. This is a low concentration volume growing from the ceiling down. Buoyancy is driving it initially to the ceiling, and it's going down. And basically, with 24 sensors placed there, we would detect 10% of the LFL within 6 minutes. Alternatively, in the case where we had the ventilation on, where we had circulating loops of air, the hydrogen isn't getting above the lower half of the room. It's getting trapped. And there, we're not actually detecting hydrogen at the current low level of detection for warning. And worse, we're not actually ventilating hydrogen. And this is actually the existing design in the laboratory right now that we're in the process of upgrading. Let me check, how much time do I have left?
Probably about 5 minutes, and then we'll do some time for questions.
Okay, so we're doing a comparable study for outdoor releases at one of NREL's facility. There we don't have ventilation, but we do have wind, and we're developing sensor placement strategies for the ARI site, which currently has the capability of releasing up to, well, it's producing 22 kilograms of hydrogen per hour that's used for R&D purposes, looking at fuel cells, looking at integration of the fuel cells to the grid, looking at simulated renewable electricity generation to run a fuel cell stack. And it has significant historical record keeping for wind and speeds. And we're using this as a test bed for outdoor sensor placement strategies. And one of the takeaways is that hydrogen levels are going to be impacted by the leak rate, wind, and distance. And where you place your sensor, you have to accommodate what the expected levels are. It's a function of distance. This is actually a takeaway. Obviously, right at the release point, you essentially have 100% hydrogen, but it's going to dilute down to percent levels within feet of the release point. And when you get to about 50 feet away, you're already down to thousands of ppm. And even a short distance beyond that, you're going to be down to 10 ppm. And so if you're placing a sensor array remote from your point of release, and if you have distributed system, you probably won't be right up to all potential release points, but you'll see increases in hydrogen that are 10 to 100 ppm. So we have to begin modeling how hydrogen releases occur and use that to identify unattended releases. And our long-range goal is to source, locate, and quantify leaks using CFD modeling integrated with advanced analytics to develop inverse CFD for the source location and quantitation. I'm not going to go into the digital twin I don't have time. This is just saying we're applying analytics with detection to improve facility safety. I'll quickly wrap up. Point sensors have positive things. They're common, they're commercially available at a low cost. A challenge is they actually have to be in contact with the hydrogen, and that can actually cause delays, dilutions, and actually lower the reliability of point sensors. And one solution that we're looking at is standoff methods. We're actually are in the process of deploying ultrasonic detectors at ARES. Some commercial facilities are also exploring that, even though these have been around for quite a long time in the natural gas industry. It's only in the past 2 or 3 years they've been applied to hydrogen facilities, and we've tested numerous models, and we're assessing their usefulness. The challenge with an ultrasonic detector is to identify the sounds associated with the leak to background sounds and operational sounds. And that's actually the focus of our work right now, is to how to optimize detection of leak. Another exciting application is you can actually image a plume using a method called Schlieren, which basically optimizes a signal from a digital camera to look actually pixel by pixel to see changes in refractive index due to a lower density, such as released hydrogen. And here we're applying a standard design that's been published, but using advanced analysis algorithms such as AI to provide in near real time the image of a plume as is occurring. We're going to try to demonstrate this at an off-site facility. Such a system is not commercially available yet, but we are trying to improve the TRL level. What the advantage of these methods have is that they're fast, real time, and can detect the leak as it's occurring. And they can do a broad range, not just a single point. I'll finish with just saying our work with the Sensor Lab is we look at basic technology and trying to advance sensing elements to analyzers, advance the TRL. This can be supporting developers on the design of their sensing element, but also we provide a lot of electronic support. The field demonstrations and deployment. We can also help enhance the capability of the sensors in the field. This includes integrating the integration electronics. Many universities may not have the wherewithal to develop systems that can integrate into standard safety operating systems. Another consideration that was pressed upon us in another project is these systems have to include cybersecurity. You don't want the sensor to be a conduit to the control system of a large-scale facility through hacking by bad players. We're using our detection technologies expertise to develop model dispersions and applications. This will improve our capability to place sensor, give guidance on sensor placement, and also to quantify what the releases are. And since we've been around for a while and have a lot of industrial collaborations, we can support market development and commercialization, and also support industrial developments of new markets, such as wind to hydrogen. We have numerous projects. I'll skip that. I'll close with, only thing I'll say about our component reliability program. The sensors detect hydrogen releases when they occur. And our main concern, not only concern, is unintended releases. Our component R&D program strives to minimize the occurrence of releases. And I will volunteer to talk about that at a meeting in the fall, if that works, because I think we're out of time. And I will just wrap up with acknowledging 2 colleagues, Andrei Chufalov, who worked with me on indoor hydrogen releases. He regrettably passed away in March, so anyway, he set the stage for some of our studies. And Katrina Groth, We didn't talk about component reliability, but she's at the University of Maryland, the Center for Risk and Reliability. She's working with Genevieve Sauer and myself on component reliability. I have a team of people who are part-time, full-time in my program, providing support for detection, component reliability, modeling, and analysis. With that, I will open up for discussion.